So since this is a basic lesson, it can be an extra fun opportunity to really bring your attention to how you're doing your movements. So question 1 is, how are you laying on the floor? And if you spend a few moments with your attention on the pattern that you're making on the floor, does it change? Roll over onto your left side. Bend your 2 knees up in front of you. And notice how you're laying on the floor now. And if you bring your attention again to the pattern, the idea of a pattern that you're making along the left side of you, and when you pay attention to what parts of you are heavily resting on the floor and what parts of you are not touching the floor, you might start to realize that somewhere there's some little contraction. So notice your inner thigh muscles. Notice the feeling of the muscles in your feet and ankles. And then your chest and neck and your upper back. And stand your right hand on the floor in front of you. Do a gentle, delicate movement of bringing your right shoulder a little forward and back. And notice, how do you do that movement? You have a choice. So it might be interesting to see what it feels like to do the movement in a different way. Does the way that you move your shoulder have an influence on how it feels to be resting on the floor? Take a little pause for a moment. And then see, how do you do a movement of bringing your right hip a little bit forward and back? How much force do you use? You can choose. You could even choose maybe to do it in such a way that it's interesting, that it keeps your attention. Maybe not so much when the beginners come or when beginners do the lesson, but for you guys, by now, it might actually really be interesting. Okay, and then pause for just a moment. And then do a movement of your head that's similar, but in this case, a bit more of a rolling of your head forward and back. How do you do that movement? With determination? With indifference? What part of you are you using to create a movement of your head? And then leave that and bring your attention to your 2 legs and see if you can sense the weight of your top leg on your bottom leg. The kind of pattern that your right leg might make on your left leg. And then do a very gentle, delicate movement of lifting your right foot a little bit away from your left foot and then come back. It's an unusual movement. So likely your brain wants to bring in the tools that you're using for most of the things that you do. And that could work, could work well. But it's likely that if, for example, you're really using your knee or your thigh or your hip, that you might be secretly accidentally contracting in your foot and your ankle in a way that isn't actually helping you with the movement. Maybe not. But again, this is the idea around how are you doing the movement? Are you completely married to how it has to be? Now rest your foot on your foot and do a similar movement, but of your right knee. So your foot stays on your foot, but your right knee lifts a little bit away from your left knee. What do you notice about that movement? And pause for a second. So your right leg, we could say, is making some kind of pattern on your left leg. But of course, your left leg is also making some kind of pattern on the floor. Varying degrees of pressure on the floor, varying degrees of your right leg and your left leg, yeah? So what happens when you shift your attention so that you pay attention to the feeling of the pattern of your right leg on the floor as you do the movement of your left leg, alternating, first lifting your right foot and then bring it down, and then lifting your right knee and bringing it down. You lay on your back, refresh the way that you feel the floor, and see how much detail you can sense between where you are laying heavily, where the pressure gets a little bit lighter, and where there's some space between you and the floor. And in this position, do a movement of your head very slowly, very gently. Turn your head left and right. See, how do you do this movement? Could you do the movement with less effort? And notice that the pressure changes on the back of your head. But now see, could you do the movement from the feeling of the pressure on the back of your head? So instead of doing a turning movement with your neck, with your face, can you feel the pressure in the back of your head? And from that place where your head rests on the floor, do a very tiny movement of changing the pressure. And as you change the pressure, your head will move a little bit. Okay, then leave that, bend your knees, stand your feet for a second. Start to do a movement of tilting your legs to the left and to the right, very slowly, very gently. How do you do it? Where does the movement come from? What part of you? Now pause for a second. Press into your right foot until you feel more pressure on the left side. Left hip, maybe the left foot, try it. Press into your right foot until the weight of yourself goes more to the left, and then come back. So you're creating a movement and you can feel the pressure from that movement, right? Feel how the back of your pelvis, the feeling changes. Now see, can you do the movement from that place on the back of your pelvis? So more or less your legs are quiet, but your legs will respond to shifting your weight more to the left a little bit on the back of your pelvis. Just try and see what happens. And then come onto your left side. Bend your knees in front of you. Stand your right hand on the floor in front of you. And feel your left shoulder, the shoulder that you're laying on. And can you start to do a movement, changing the pressure of your left shoulder on the floor in order to bring your right shoulder forward and back? And then if you get a sense of how do I move my left shoulder to move my right shoulder, then you see, how are you doing the movement? Could you be more gentle or more smooth? So you're leaning into gravity. Okay, just pause for a moment. And then try with your head to do a similar thing. Feel the left side of your head is resting on the floor, on the cushion or the floor. And can you change how the left side of your head is so that you roll your head a little bit forward and back? And you feel, you try not to use the right side of your neck or your right shoulder. You see, how do I change how I lay on the floor, how the left side of my head lays on the floor, to bring my head to roll a little bit forward and back. Try your shoulder and your head together. You change the pressure of the floor against your left shoulder and the left side of your head so that your head and your shoulder roll a little bit forward and a little bit back. Rest on your side for a moment. Feel how your left leg is resting on the floor. And see, where do you lean more onto your left leg so that you could lift your right foot a little bit away from your left foot? How could you lean on the floor? How do you use your left side to help you very slowly, gently lift your right foot away from your left foot? Notice that you could lean your right knee on your left knee to lift your right foot. And that's different from leaning on your left knee to lift your right foot. Maybe for you, it's not the left knee. Maybe it's the left hip. Maybe it's somewhere higher up you. Maybe you lean on your left shoulder to lift your right foot. And now pause, keep your feet touching, and lift your right knee a little bit away from your left knee, your top knee a little bit away from your bottom knee, and then come back. And how does this movement feel? Where on the left side of you do you lean to lift your right knee? Now, leave your right knee resting on your left knee. Leave your foot resting on your foot. Feel the whole left side of you resting on the floor. Keep your right hand standing in front of you. And start to explore how you can roll your whole self a little bit forward and a little bit back using the floor. You lean into the floor. Try not to be excellent at the movement. Try to find what feels nice, what feels pleasant and easy. Pause on your side. Now change your position a little bit so you are leaning back a little bit. Your top knee could be back a little bit, your top shoulder back a little bit. So you're not on your back, but you're not on your side. You're somewhere between being on your back and on your side. And keep your hand on the floor in front of you if you can. And from this position, your hand doesn't need to be on the floor, somewhere near the floor. From this position, can you do a movement of your right shoulder forward and back? And how do you do that? What kind of effort are you using? What kind of strength? Have your right arm somewhere in front of you, but not touching the floor if your arm doesn't touch the floor. So it's hanging in front of you. If it touches the floor, great. Otherwise, it's resting on you, but you're not lifting your right arm. Your right arm is hanging toward the floor. And it's a movement of your shoulder forward and back. And notice how much of yourself are you using for the movement of your shoulder. Now, what's it like to use your left shoulder to move your right shoulder? Is it possible? Your right shoulder is napping, is quiet, is resting. And you do something with your left shoulder resting on the floor so that your right shoulder moves. Now, see if you can be less interested in the result and more interested in the process. More interested in the feeling of your left shoulder pressing in the floor. And what's possible for moving your left shoulder that presses into the floor. How tiny a movement can you do with your left shoulder so that you can feel other parts of yourself responding? Pause in this position that you're in. Just give your brain a pause. And notice how your left hip is resting on the floor, the hip that you're laying on. And see, can you do a movement from your left hip? Can you change the way your left hip is resting on the floor? What part of you on the right side moves when you move your left hip along the floor? Not by lifting your left hip, but by leaning into the floor, changing the pressure of your left hip on the floor. Okay, and then come onto your back, straighten your legs, bring your arms down. What has changed about your contact with the floor? How do you lay on the floor now? Come onto your right side. Bend your knees in front of you. Stand your left hand in front of you. And feel, how are you resting on your right side? How comfortable are you? How is the pressure different on the right hip and the right shoulder? How is the pressure different on the right knee and the right foot? Do a movement of bringing your left shoulder a little bit forward and back, and feel how it is. Feel how gently you can do the movement, how slowly, and also how simple. Is it possible to only move your shoulder, not your head, not your back, not your hip, only your shoulder? What do you notice about the shoulder that you lay on when you move your other shoulder? And then change it. Keep your left shoulder quiet and see if you can do a movement with the shoulder that you're lying on, your right shoulder, so that your left shoulder is moved a little bit forward and back. How is that on this side? Leave your left shoulder quiet and see if you can use the right side of your head to roll your head a little bit forward and back. The right side of your face, but gently, slowly. Join your right shoulder and your head. Can you slightly change how you lay on your right shoulder and on your head so that you move yourself a little bit forward and back? Are you doing it in a way so that you're sure the feeling is strong, so you're sure about what you're doing in your sensation? What if you dialed it down more? So maybe you're not sure what you're feeling. What if the movement is so small that you learn about what you're feeling not from a strong sensation, from something else? Rest for a moment. And where on your right leg do you lean into the floor to lift your left foot a little bit and bring it back down? So instead of using the muscles on the left side of you, you try to keep the left side of you very quiet, and you use the side that's touching the floor to lift your foot. Where do you do that? And then try it, keep your feet together, try it with your left knee. So where do you lean on the floor to lift your left knee? So small. So you learn from a new feeling, not a feeling that you feel all the time. And maybe it doesn't really work out. Maybe you don't really lift your knee, but it doesn't matter. You're just trying to feel new things. Leave your leg quiet, bring your attention to your hips, and use your right hip to slightly bring your left hip forward and back. Take your whole self more onto your belly. So you're not completely on your belly, but you're leaning more forward. Your top knee might be on the floor. Your belly is coming toward the floor. Your front shoulder is coming toward the floor. And if you can, more or less, you're still knee on top of knee, but instead of being directly on your side, you're falling forward a little bit. So first you see, well, how is it different? How is the pressure on the right side of you different? You can compare it, go back onto your true side, feel the floor, and then if you go a little bit forward again, what's different about the floor? Keep your knee on your knee if you can. So you're just tipped forward a little bit, but you're not really changing your position. But because you're touching the floor in a little bit of a different way, it means you can learn about yourself in a little bit of a different way. So do the same movement of your hips now. Use your left hip, leaning on the floor as it is now, to bring your right hip a little bit forward and back. Is it easier or harder when your whole self is leaning forward?
Is it not the other way around?
Correct, it's not the other way around.
Okay.
On the other side, we did it the other way around. On this side, we're doing this way around. He, are, well, oh, I'm sorry. Did I misunderstand your question?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, my languaging. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yes. What I said, right hip? So you're moving your left hip by way of your right hip. The same thing that you've been doing.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm just trying to come up with as many ways of saying the same thing until all of you have a moment of realizing what it means in your own sensation. And eventually, all of you will learn that there's more than the way that you're doing it to do it, maybe. Okay, what about the shoulder situation? So keep your hips and your legs quiet. Have your left hand standing on the floor. In this funny situation where your chest is leaning toward the floor, could you move your weight on your right shoulder, move your weight on your right shoulder, and see what happens? So again, you could push really hard to move the weight on your right shoulder. That would probably be more habitual, right? Pushing hard, feeling a sensation that you're used to. And if you're curious, you could also see what happens if you don't do that. See if you're open to not much happening. So maybe your right shoulder moves a millimeter and there's just slightly more pressure on the side of your right shoulder blade. But if you're not distracted by your ambition, you might find that you actually notice something happens. What about your whole self? How do you use the way that you're resting on the right side of you to somehow change the position of the left side of you? So small, so gentle. And just see how it is for you, right? You don't need to do it a certain way, a right way. You see, how is it for you? Oh, I see. I can move my right hip on the floor, but not my shoulder. Oh, isn't that interesting? Oh, I see. I don't know how to stop straining in this place. Isn't that interesting? Right? You see, how do you do this? Pause for a moment. Stay on your side, but roll a little bit toward your back. So the way that you're laying on the floor is a little bit different. And see, with the way that you're laying on the floor a little bit different, how is it to use the right side of you to lift your left knee a little bit? Your hips are already rolled back a bit, like you were going to come onto the floor. You're already tilted. Maybe it feels less like a lifting toward the ceiling, and maybe it's more just a change of the position. Yeah. You can keep leaning your weight along the floor, however it feels nice, pleasant, interesting. But now compare with, stop with the leg for a second, but compare with yourself rolled back a little bit. What's it like to try to lift your left foot? Where do you lean on the right side if you're already leaned a little bit back? Is it different from when you were completely on your side? Or compare, lean yourself a little bit forward and see what's it like to lift your left foot. Compare that to when you're leaned a little bit back and you lift your left foot. And then leave it and come rest on your back. And see now, how do you rest on your back? And do a little bit of your own research and see, maybe start, let's say, okay, I'll give you an example. So maybe you use your left shoulder and you see, can you change the pressure of the back of your left shoulder in the floor? And where do you feel a change? Maybe you change the pressure of one of your hips, change the pressure of one of your heels. Do your own research. Just see for yourself what is interesting about how you press more in the floor in one place, and it moves other parts of you. How do you lean into gravity? You can do a big movement, a small movement, just make it your own. See what's interesting. No right way to do this. There's no achievement. It's practicing feeling more things, feeling different things. And then one more time, come onto your left side. Bend up your two knees, put your head on the blanket. Use the right side of you, the top part of you that's closest to the ceiling. Use the right side of you. Yeah, you can still have your right hand on the floor as you have. Yeah. Use the right side of you to roll your whole self slightly back and slightly forward. Use the right side of you to change the position of the left side of you. Keep your right hand resting on the floor, or if it comes away from the floor, it's just because it's being dragged. Don't lift your hand. And feel how you can use the right side of you to change the way that you rest on the left side of you. Okay, now compare, pause, and find out what it's like for you to change how you're laying on the left side of you to move the right side of you. You do a very, very small, gentle movement on the left side of you and see what effect does it have? What change do you feel? Can you use the left side of you to roll onto your back with your feet standing? And then use the right side of you to return. So you roll toward your back from the left side of you. And then you roll to your left side from the right side of you. Can you do it and keep your arm hanging? Can you use your right shoulder, right hip, right knee, right foot to roll onto your left side? Use your left foot, left knee, left hip, left shoulder to roll onto your back. Use your right shoulder, right hip, right foot to roll onto your left side. And use your left side to roll onto your back. Use the left side of your head, left shoulder, left hip, left knee, left foot to roll onto your back. Use the right side of your head, right shoulder, right hip, right foot to roll onto your left side. Now, if you've made sense of the instruction, can you do the opposite? Again, not with ambition, right? The moment you're determined to do it right, the organic learning process is interrupted. Then you're going to use the tools you've always used because your brain's like, no, 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 forget about this rolling business. I'm going to use the inner thighs. I'm going to use the jaw. I'm going to use the abdominal muscles. Then pause for just a moment on your back. See if you could even enjoy the way that the floor feels. Notice if one side of you is different from the other side of you. Now, if you do this slow enough, you can probably feel what you're doing. If you do it quickly or with ambition, you probably can't. So take as much time as you need rolling onto your right side and see. How do you roll onto your right side? Do you lean into the floor or do you lift away from the floor? You don't have to control it, just see what you do naturally. Roll onto your right side, slow enough that you can see how do you do that? What's your habit? And then without controlling it, roll onto your back. Don't try to do anything, just feel. What do you do? And then again, roll onto your right side. What do you do? Roll onto your back. What do you do? And then roll onto your left side. What do you do? Is it different? Is it the same? And do a little bit of research. And then the next time you're on your right side, just pause for a moment on your right side. And see if you can do a little study here on your right side. So can you lean on your right side gradually, slowly, slowly, slowly to roll yourself onto your back? But then see, can you lean onto your right side to roll onto your right side? Can you lean onto your right hip, right shoulder, right head, right knee, right foot to roll onto your right side? And maybe it's push the floor or press into the floor. How could you press your right side into the floor to come onto your back? And then press your right side into the floor to come onto your right side. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you just see what you can do. Press your right side to come onto your right side. Press your right side to come onto your back. And then start to learn, how are you pressing? Are you pressing in a way that you could reduce the effort? And then do a little bit of your own research or rest if you're cooked. And just see what you can learn about how you move, how you change your position. How do you make the experience more pleasurable? And if you're not resting already, then how do you come to rest on your back? What do you notice about yourself? So take the next 5 minutes to yourself. Continue resting. Explore the movement if you want to. Maybe take a little slow walk around and see how you feel after the lesson. And I'll see you soon.